happy, healthy, and successful 2023 is wished to everyone. We already have 4 New Year's in the Jewish calendar. One is coming up, Tu B'Shvat. So we can celebrate the 5th as well. This week's Parsha is VaYechi. With it, we finish the first of our Chameshet Chomshei Torah, Sefer Berachot. I've entitled this discussion, Legacies, Blessings, and Challenges. What we will see in the words of VaYechi and the last chapters of Berachot is continued traditions, continuation of signs and physical symbols that we've discussed earlier, continued missteps, which perhaps may not actually be missteps, but God's hand, or a human being trying to do what they think is best, however you want to take that. But to be sure, we see the continuation, and if you will, the solidification, as you'll see at the end of this discussion, in the words and teachings of Rav Shlomo Briskin, of the things that mark our lives. So here in VaYechi, we focus on the life of Yaakov, just as we did in the life of Sarah and Chaye Sarah. Notice, VaYechi, Chaye Sarah, the life of. Yet, in both Parshiot, what we're actually going to read about is the end of those respective lives. So is the name of the Parsha counterintuitive? Or rather, is it instructive in that we think about the legacy, the lessons learned and left for the benefit of those of us who stay on this planet, the charges we bestow on those we love, both by actions and by deeds, as in the Berachot that are given to each of the children at the end of Bereshit. We've all lost ones that we love. And we note that at many of the funerals, many of the Levayot that we have attended, we celebrate the life. We want to remember the deeds, the legacies, the blessings, and the challenges of those that have helped us on our way, and not focus on the sadness of the separation from them in our lives. As I have shared in the past, one of my very closest lifelong friends left this earthly existence this past year around Pesach. As she knew very well what was happening, she left quite clear instructions about many things in terms of how she wanted the funeral to be arranged, what needed to be done afterwards, and so on. Poignantly, she made very clear to her children that while there was clearly material wealth and monetary inheritances to be had, she was leaving them each other and the values with which they had been raised. She and her husband, both of whom died much too young, had always shown by deed and word, as well as confirmed in their own voice, what their legacy was to be, and the charge for their children and their grandchildren to continue living within the framework that they had established. This, I believe, is the most powerful gift we give to our children and to each other. The charge to live as we have, much more important than the distribution of acquired material wealth and stuff. Here is where we see the power of the beginning of this parsha. We learn. VaYechi, Yaakov lived in the land of Egypt for 17 years, and Yaakov's days, the years of his life, were 147 years. Shnei chayav sheva shanim v'arba'a u'ma'ot shana. When the time grew near for Yisrael, and notice the 2 names that are being used here, to die, he calls to him the son Yosef, and says to him, "If I have found favor in your eyes, put your hand underneath my thigh and deal with me with loving kindness, and do not, I'll not bury me in Mitzrayim." He calls his son Yosef as we learn in Berachot Rabbah, the one who had the ability to make this happen. What I would like to add to the discussion is the notion is for him to use his position of power for purposes that would serve his family and his father's legacy of continuity from generation to generation, not to abuse this power for personal gain or other nefarious reasons. He says, Simna yadecha, now place your hand beneath my thigh and promise me, swear. We know, and we've discussed earlier, how this is an established physical symbol of promise, and why placing the hand under the thigh near the site of Brit Milah, as two individuals bind themselves in this promise, God is also present. This reinforces our need that we have discussed in past weeks for symbolic and physical actions to accompany intent. Chesed ve'emet, do loving kindness and truth with me. And we know that loving kindness with the dead is true loving kindness, again, from Berachot Rabbah, for one does not expect any payment or reward. Yaakov continues, allow me to lie with my forefathers, carry me out of Egypt, bury me in their grave. And he says, Yosef, Anochi aseh kidvarecha, I will do as you say. So to continue this tradition of the family's generations to lie together, begun by Avraham Avinu, think about ethical wills or directions given to family members when one dies, such as was the case with my dear friend. The connection of the symbolic action and the real action it represents are inextricably connected to each other. Now, I want to look for a moment at this parallel text in Chayei Sarah. We read back in chapter 23. VaYechi Chayei Sarah 100 shana ve'esrim shana ve'sheva shanim shnei Chayei Sarah. Again, shnei Chayei Sarah, as we said here, shnei Chayei Yaakov. Note that while Yaakov dies in a foreign land and asks to be taken back to his homeland, it is with Sarah's death, those generations earlier, that this home space is in fact defined. And the text explains Sarah died in Kiryat Arba, which is Hebron in the land of Canaan, and Abraham comes to eulogize and to bewail her death. Abraham gets up and he says, I'm a stranger, an inhabitant in your land. I will buy this burial property from you. And from this we have the mitzvah that we must own our burial plots when we bury those that are dead. The reason that the word shanim, years, was written after every digit, we're told by our commentaries, is that every digit is to be expounded upon individually. In Sarah's case, when she was 100-year-old, she was like a 20-year-old regarding sin. Just as a 20-year-old has not sinned because she is not liable to punishment, so too when she was 100 years old, she was blameless. And when she was 20, she was like a 7-year-old in terms of innocence and beauty. This is a remez. This is a hinted meaning. And the Baal Torah explains, VaYechi, and he lived. In Gematria is 37, which represents here the primary years, the most important years of Sarah's life, which followed Yitzchak's birth. For she was 90 when he was born, and we are told that the total number of years here are 127 years. Vayiyu Chayei Sarah 100 shana, 100 years, Esrim 20, V'sheva 7. Now, continue in the text and find yet another familiar trope or refrain we see. When Yisrael saw Yosef's sons, he says, who are these? And we know that in the story of Yitzchak and Yaakov and Esav, remember the blessings that go to the other son? So we have this concept of midah keneged midah, measure for measure, or God overseeing and humans acting as humans will and do. So Yosef says to his father, these are my sons, God gives them to me, and he says to him, bring them near, Chana Eliv Avarchem, bring them near so I can bless them. So he says, he goes and he takes them and positions them. And now we see again, as we saw VaYechi, the Einei Yisrael kibdu mizoken. Yisrael's eyes had become dim, heavy with the age. So he could not see, he could not absolutely discern who was who. Similar to Yitzchak, and we've discussed this, post-traumatic syndromes, with everything that each of these folks have gone through, the challenges in their lives, it does leave an effect. We all carry what is with us, in us. In my signature, for anyone who's ever received an email from my general email account, you know that I quote Madame Chen Kai-shek, "We are the sum total of everywhere we've been, everyone we've known, and everything we've done." And this is absolutely true. So Yisrael goes to Yosef and says, "I didn't even expect to see you, and here you are here, and not only are you here, but your children are here." Yosef takes them, and he bows to the ground, and he then places them, Ephraim at the right, from Yisrael's left, and Menashe at the left, from Israel's right, and brings them close to him. In other words, placing them in position for their proper designated blessings for the eldest and the youngest. Notice, it is precisely Yaakov who tricked his own father, who is now on the other end of this situation. Yisrael then goes and stretches out his right hand and places it on Ephraim's head, even though he's the youngest, his left hand on Menashe's head, the oldest. He guides his hands deliberately, for Menashe is the firstborn. The Targum says, Ach keminum. He places wisdom in them, and he guides his hands in order to convey that wisdom of value to each of the children. He knew very well that Menashe was the firstborn, but nevertheless did not place his right hand on him. He blesses Yosef, and he says, "God, before whom my fathers, Abraham and Yitzhak, walked, has sustained me, and I am alive until this day. May the angel who redeemed me from all harm bless these youth, your children, and may they be called by my name and the name of my fathers, Abraham and Yitzhak, and may they multiply abundantly." In verse 17, Yosef sees that his father is placing his right hand on Ephraim's head, and it displeases him. So he holds up his hand from Ephraim's head to place it on Menashe's. And Yosef says to his father, "But father, this is the firstborn. Place your right hand on his head." But Yaakov, Yisrael, refuses. And he says, "I know, my child. He too will become a great people, and he too will be noted. But Achiv hakatan yigdal mimenu. His youngest son will be greater than him," which we've already seen happen. They each will become a people, but the younger one will be greater. And this is following a pattern that has been established in this family. This now becomes part of the legacy. And we're going to see this repeatedly. Think of when David is designated as king of Israel. It is not always the oldest or the biggest or the strongest, but maybe the one who has to work a bit harder, like Yaakov did, who will get the biggest blessing. Kind of the opposite of the prodigal son, for those of us that know that from our Christian friends. So he blesses them on that day, saying, "With you, Yisrael will bless," saying, "May God make you like Ephraim and Menashe," and he places Ephraim before Menashe. Israel then says to Yosef, "Behold, I'm going to die. God be with you. And he will return you to the land of your forefathers. And I've given you one portion over your brothers." Remember, Menashe and Ephraim are each going to get a portion. So 2 go to Yosef, because all the other brothers get their own portion. So Let's think about Yerusha, about inheritance. The challenges, the blessings that are part of the legacy that we pass from generation to generation. This is the blessing that we bestow when we bless our sons in the name of Menashe and Ephraim, and our daughters by Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. What exactly are we bestowing upon them when we do so? We then read in chapter 49 at the very end of the Parshat, and these are the 12 tribes of Israel. And this is what their father spoke and blessed them, each one according to his blessing. VaYivrach otam ish asher kevirchato barech otam. In other words, each one receives a blessing that is appropriate for him, his needs, his challenges. We spoke earlier about the lack of differentiating between acknowledging that there's a difference between equality and equity. That equity demands that we give each person what they need in order to achieve comparable levels with others. Practicing raw equality, everybody gets the same piece of fruit, regardless of age, regardless of ability to eat, regardless of allergies, is not helpful. If you need that amount of energy or healthy food, then we have to allow that what will be yielded for each person in terms of healthy intake will not be the same, and therefore what is offered has to respond to their needs, not to some general principle. So Yisrael understands this. And in so doing, the blessings, the challenges that are cited, all of this are given to each of the children. Now, it may appear, according to Rashi, that some of these are not blessed at all, but rather are somehow critiqued. But this is what is intended. This is what their father spoke to them. One might think that he did not bless Reuven, Shimon, and Levi, but he did. Sometimes mentioning the challenge is the way to bless. I know that you are hot-headed. I know that you have to work harder physically. I know that you have a more limited comfort zone. Acknowledging our challenges is what allows us to achieve. And perhaps what is being passed on here is not a mere statement of fact that would provide a sort of sense of stasis. This is who you are, this is who you'll always be. But rather the challenge, the acknowledgement of the challenge, the I see you factor that is indicative here, may in fact be what turns this into a blessing. When Yaakov bestows upon Yehuda the might of a lion, and upon Binyamin the power to seize like a wolf, and upon Naphtali the fleetness of a gazelle, we have to look underneath the words, as Aviva Zornberg teaches us, and we have to consider what is it that is being expressed as a hope for them. He then says, I will be brought to my people, buried with my fathers in the cave, in that same cave that was established by Sarah Imenu and Abraham Avinu. What we want to note here, and what we want to note when we bless our children, every Friday night, my husband and I bless all 4 of our children. These days, a lot of times on the phone or Zoom or whatever we can work with, given that everybody is sort of scattered to the 4 winds. We always end with an individual prayer. Because our children are not carbon copies of any particular type. They are each individuals, and each live individually, have their own challenges, have their own blessings, have their own strengths, and we want to acknowledge that. This acknowledgement of the balance of the individual personalities and then bringing all together as a unit must be recognized here. The second the piece of the puzzle where we are all part of a unified whole, of a collective, is just as important and valuable as the former, the acknowledgement of individuality. They will be asked to bury their father where Abraham, Sarah, Yitzhak, Rivka, and Leah have been buried as well. And this is mentioned here as well, the family plot, if you will. So at this end, we have ethical wills, legacies of values, acknowledgement of different individuals. Within that acknowledgement, what is best for one individual will be different than what is for another. Balancing that individuality with the collective. So now I want to bring this together with some teaching from Rav Shlomo Riskin. Rav Riskin teaches as follows. He asks a question. Why is Yosef, the towering personality of the last 4 portions of the book of Berachot, not considered the 4th patriarch of Israel? After all, he does receive a double share of the inheritance through Manasseh and Ephraim, the 2 tribes who emanate from him. And it is he who will save the family and thus the Jewish people from starvation and oblivion. And he will answer his own question by suggesting that he took us to a point, but now we're on the precipice of another chapter, and we have to acknowledge that. Rabbi Riskin continues, moreover, why does Moshe emerge as the savior and redeemer of the book of Shemot? What catapults this prince of Egypt to such an exalted position of Jewish leadership when he was raised in Pharaoh's palace, sports an Egyptian name, Moshe meaning son of an Egyptian, and seems totally disconnected from Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov? Let us begin with Moshe. I believe it was the great professor Nechama Leibowitz of blessed memory who pointed out that Moshe is a great fighter against injustice, whether it is perpetrated by Egyptians against Hebrews, or Hebrews against Hebrews, or Midianite against Midianite. According to this, something is missing from Yosef. What do we think is missing? What do we learn from this? How are we all not there yet, missing something? Rabbi Riskin has us circle back to the idea of legacy and challenge. And I would say that it is this precise notion that is reflected in the Berachot we bestow and receive. Not being empty platitudes. We often hear when somebody dies these statements and we're like, wait a minute, are they talking about this person? But what is being suggested here is to be realistic about who we are, about what we've achieved, about what the limitations are, about the lessons that are learned. That's what's going to help our children and our grandchildren and the generations to come. Just as Chaye Sarah begins with Sarah taking leave of her earthly existence and ends with Avram doing the same, bringing Yitzchak and Yishmael back together, here too, we began our Parsha with the death of Yaakov, and we end as follows. V'yamat Yosef ben Mea ve'aser shanim ve'chatu oto v'yisem ve'aram b'Mitzrayim. Yosef dies at the age of 110 years, and they embalmed him, and he was placed into a coffin in Egypt. Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, Zichrono L'Shalom, teaches, if you want to understand what a book is about, look carefully at how it ends. Berachot ends with 3 significant scenes. 1, Yaakov blesses his grandsons, Ephraim and Manasseh. This is the blessing that Jewish parents use on Friday night to bless their sons. My predecessor, says Rabbi Sacks, Lord Jacobovitz, used to ask, why is this blessing of all blessings in the Torah? He gave a beautiful reply. He said, all the others are from fathers to sons, and between fathers and sons there can be tension. Yaakov's blessing of Ephraim and Manasseh is the only instance in the Torah of a grandparent blessing a grandchild. And between grandparents and grandchildren, there is pure love, not as much of that parental pressure or tension. Second, Yaakov blesses his 12 sons. There is discernible tension here. His blessings to his eldest 3 sons, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi, read more like curses, like, this is what you've done, than blessings. Yet the fact is that he is blessing all 12 together in the same room and at the same time. We have not seen this before. There is no record of Abraham blessing either Yishmael or Yitzhak. Yitzhak blesses Esav and Yaakov separately. The mere fact that Yaakov is able to gather his sons together is unprecedented and important. In the next chapter, the first of Shemot, the Israelites are for the first time described as a people. It is hard to see how they could live together as a people if they could not all live together as a family. Third, this is still Rabbi Sachs speaking. After the death of Yaakov, the brothers asked Yosef to forgive them, which he does. He had also done earlier. Evidently, the brothers harbored the suspicion that he was merely biding his time until his father died, as Esav at one point resolved to do. Sons do not take revenge within the family while the father is alive. So goes the thinking. That seems to have been the principle in those days. Yosef speaks directly to their fears and puts them at rest. And he says, as we have seen, you sold me. You placed all these situations in action. But God intended me to be here. So God's intentions for me overrode any intention that you had to do harm to me. The Torah is telling us an unexpected message here. The family is prior to all else, to the land, the nation, politics, economics, pursuit of power, and accumulation of wealth. We begin Bereshit with the first family, and we end Bereshit after generations of trauma, of rejection, of missed steps. But the family is in one room, and that is indeed powerful. The lesson here is what we leave to our heirs and what we are left with from our ancestors. Challenges, blessings, and legacies. As my friend explained to her daughters and sons-in-law, yes, there is land, property, valuables, money, but that is not what I'm leaving you with. I leave you with the legacy of all that Abba and I taught you and with each other. I think that message is beautiful. It is healing within the great pain of their loss. It gives us their legacy. And my prayer at this new year, as we finish this time around the book of Bereshit, may we all be so intentional about articulating what our legacy is, what the challenges of our children are, and bless them accordingly. Shabbat Shalom, and next week on to Sefer Shemot. As we always say when we finish one of our Chameshet Chomshei Torah, Chazak, Chazak, V'nit Chazek. Go forth in strength, my friends. Lehitraat.